So good. Welcome, everybody. We got another episode of Lifestyle Medicine today. And today, my guest is Josh Brill, who's a music and mindfulness teacher, professional musician, and producer, specifically focused on using music as a form of medicine and a tool for self development. He's been playing guitar for 32 years, teaching for 27, and currently offers online programs on music mindfulness. And Josh Brill is my friend, and for those of you who have followed my work at all, if you saw Financial Feng Shui that I made about 2 years ago, which was an online feng shui program, Josh helped me film it. I don't know what you call it, Josh, screenwriting it, where you helped me with all of the cue cards and all of that stuff. But Josh,
I guess producing.
Yeah, producing. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. So Josh helped me with that. So he's got a great creative mind. And thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, for sure. That is definitely for sure. So let's just kind of open this up. We had talked about this a long time ago, and we've been talking about it in recent months as well, talking about sort of how you approach mindfulness and the use of music and playing guitar specifically, which I always thought was really cool. You kind of described it as a methodology or a way to access mindfulness by the actual strumming of the strings and not just learning notes per se, but it was actually a process of like how you physically engage, where your mind is, how you sit, how you're breathing. And I thought that was cool because you brought the body and the mind kind of into the guitar process. So if you could, we gave the basic intro, but if you could kind of just give an overarching approach to how you're approaching music and why mindfulness matters in the context of music, all that stuff is pretty cool. So I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a long journey as the intro. I've been doing this since I was 8. I'm 40 now, so 32 years. And when I was 12, I just knew this is what I was doing with my life. Like it was just very clear. And the little catch is I wasn't necessarily born a musical prodigy or even somebody musically gifted, or might I even say talented, at least at first glance. And I don't know what that is, but through my years, I've met musicians who were just kind of either born with that thing or they picked it up at an early age and they just had that knack for it.
Right.
I didn't, but I had a really strong calling towards it. And having had realized that this was my life at 12, I really began to get serious about learning music and trying to figure this thing out. So like while I don't consider myself to be naturally gifted, although I'll put those in quotations because we could kind of like talk about that later.
Sure.
Because I've later found that we all have the gift of music. Some might just need to open it up and find the way to access it. And for whatever it is, maybe those special people already have the access, but anyway, but I had this sense of, well, it's possible. I always knew music was possible, even if it was difficult for me. And I had trouble finding rhythm or pitch or all of the things that make up music. I knew it was possible. And since I began playing when I was 8, by the time I was 13, 14, I began teaching, somewhat professionally. And that opened up a huge insight to learn how people learn. And it taught me that a big part of what the musical experience is deeply connected to our awareness. And I realized this at 14 because I would have different students and they would all learn differently. And, I don't know how I knew this at the time, but as a teacher, I kind of looked at it like puzzle pieces. So if this person didn't understand this concept, it wasn't that there was anything wrong with them. I just didn't find a way to present it to them in a way that they would understand it just yet. So that sort of like at an early age really set my mind exploring what the internal awarenesses need to be that necessitate the musical process.
Very cool.
And then from then until now, it's been quite the journey of twists and turns. I ended up pursuing music to a degree, literally a degree. I went to Berkeley in Boston, graduated. They asked me to teach there. I taught there. And I guess just through having different teachers and my own continued experience of the musical path, it really always came down to awareness and attention. And I had some pretty profound experiences musically where I felt like I learned how to internally align to let the music flow. And whereas before those moments, I considered myself not musically inclined or not talented, what I recognized was that music is actually inside. It's an internal process. And when the internal alignment, it's almost like a Rubik's Cube, happens between our auditory awareness, our physical body kinesthetic awareness, and literally where our thoughts are in our internal attention. When those things are aligned and in harmony, music really can begin to flow.
Yeah.
So I began having those experiences where all of a sudden I realized that my hunch and my hope that there was music inside, there was, and it just took a certain level of working with the internal awarenesses until there was truly an inner harmony that began to release the music externally.
Yeah, I like what you said. And there's a saying, and I'm going to kind of butcher it, but I'm paraphrasing. But they talk about, talent, whether it's acquired or bestowed naturally. In the end, it's the same, and it's a crossover, right? Like kind of saying that, like if you develop a skill, people equate talent. Like they kind of they think that you're talented per se, or whether you were just born with it. But in the end, like when you get to this end point, they kind of look the same. Like if you spent time really developing something, it looks like you have a naturally bestowed talent, like you've actually built something.
For sure.
And then there's that whole epigenetic piece. Like if you build a talent or if you build a skill that turns into a talent, then your children benefit often in some way. Like they're going to get that gift. So it's kind of a cool thing. I like that you said that it's, whether we all have the gift per se, it's in there. I like that. Do you think, in terms of you going down, I would say the awareness, mindfulness path regarding the practice and cultivation of music, did you have any experiences with teachers, or I guess, in your terrain of exploring music, did you have those experiences with people or teachers where you thought that was lacking? And did it create a rift in you, or was it just something that you naturally sort of fell into? Because sometimes people have a counterpoint where they're like, oh, I didn't like that, therefore I've gone this way.
Yeah. My path with teachers, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it's like, like bow of reverence to our teachers, how important guides are along the way.
Absolutely.
I really feel every stage of my development, I feel truly blessed that I had the perfect teacher for that time. And I really didn't have much experience with what I would call not great teachers. I did have some, and I'm happy to bring it up in contrast. But I just look back when I was first beginning at 8, I had the perfect teacher for an 8-year-old. And then my next teacher when I was 13, he was a great teacher for that. And then in high school, I had 2 different teachers. So like it all, like I had I had very, very positive support. At Berkeley, there were a few. There were a few teachers that would help a contrast. And it wasn't so much the contrast of them not being mindfully based, but for me, it was a little bit more that they were stuck in their own criticism. So, one teacher that comes to mind who, if I looked at my nemesis teacher, she would be it. She didn't like me. I didn't like her. It was very mutual.
Yeah.
And, but she was just extremely judgmental, and she was a voice teacher. And, just one of the things that stick out was she would call Sting stink. And it really rubbed me the wrong way. And I wasn't a Sting fan, but it was just the judgment and the criticism, which I would say is part of the mindfulness practice, is learning how not to be judgmental and critical and accepting rather than, but that really rubbed me the wrong way. And I could look at that as contrast, because as I mentioned, I've been teaching for a long time, I taught all throughout high school, through college, after college. I ended up taking a sabbatical because I just taught so much. When I came back to teaching, it was really almost to help, well, not almost, but specifically to help people who wish to play music, but have stories that they can't, for example. And so much of the traditional music education, in my opinion, which a lot of it stems from Eastern European 1800 school that's very discipline oriented, very strict, very rigid, or, and this might sound like I'm shitting on some people, but a lot of guitar teachers who may be good guitarists but not be great teachers.
Yes.
Because it's a different skill set.
Yep.
So many people who have wished to play music but might not have had that natural gift uncovered met with a teacher who was either judging, critical, over disciplinarian, or not helping them learn how to learn. So I think a lot of people have had a negative experience perhaps, or at least a disengaging experience learning music, because music hasn't been presented in this way. And
right.
As I've been really focusing on doing that, it's been so enriching because, one, it's not an egotistical thing for me, but it's really that I love music so much that I believe anybody who has any desire to play music really should have the ability or the pathway to it. And the other path, which is practice an hour a day, you suck, like that kind of overly critical, strict, it just creates, for most people, disengagement. And then they don't have a positive experience, and then they stop.
Yep.
So the mindfulness is specifically looking at that teacher who was so judgmental. It's like, well, we're very judgmental towards ourselves. And it's so constricting. And especially music, which is such a vulnerable experience. And it's hard, at times. We're learning a new skill. And we need to approach it like as if we had a baby who's learning how to walk. I use this analogy when I teach. It's like, well, when the baby takes its first steps and eventually falls, a good parent or a normal parent doesn't say, "What's wrong with you? How come you're not running?"
Right.
They're filled actually with joy that they see this trajectory of movement.
Yeah.
So when people are taking on a musical practice, oftentimes they have the expectation of they should be able to do everything from the get-go.
Yeah.
And that's where I really help them with their mindset, is understand you need to be gentle with yourself. You need to be compassionate. You need to watch those thoughts, because that actually creates disengagement. And just understand that this is something new. Where, specifically on the guitar, I also teach ukulele. We're asking our fingers to do something that they've never really done to that degree of
dexterity.
Dexterity. Yeah.
It requires a lot. Yeah, it does.
So we're developing neural pathways that have never been developed before. So there's just a stage of development that's needed, and the more open that we can be with it, the more spacious and the more kind to ourselves and gentle. Actually, this process begins to work in a much greater and efficient way because of that.
There's a couple different points that you hit on that I liked. One is you could take that reference in this analogy that you're using. I mean, you could apply this to a lot of different arts in general. And that's the cool part about, I think, art, is that there's a confluence when we study an art, and it's a discipline, and there's also a science to music. There's the mathematics, when you look at like the deep, it's beautiful about how it works, harmonics. And I think I like what you said, because I can relate, just to reflect to what you're saying, but to link it to something else, is my background is in martial arts. And if you even if you're not a martial artist, most people know that there's a very eat bitter, disciplinary, military-like thread to most traditional martial art training. I was involved with a martial art organization for 5 years, which I think their biggest pitfall was that very thing, the judgmental mind and spirit towards other arts and other teachers and other methods. And it was always like the teacher who said stink instead of sting.
Yeah.
And especially if I had bumped elbows with some of these other teachers and I would hear my teacher bashing them, that was always just a brutal thing to deal with. And it compromised, and it ultimately is what part of why I left the actual organization. I did have a bad taste in my mouth. It didn't sit well, and it left a bad taste, and it actually sort of poisoned, like as I touched other martial arts, I had like bad programming going into it. It actually was like a bad association.
Yeah.
I had to go and search, and I had to take almost a year break off of martial art training, and then I had to go find a teacher who was not like that. Even though I didn't study with them formally, I just had to be around them for a couple months, and I thought, oh, There we go. That's the flavor I need again, is just an open-minded, non-judgmental, and it cuts off the goodness that it takes out all of the good that can be seen. It's like no one has it all dialed perfectly.
Yeah.
There's going to be teachers who excel at certain things. And I like that you distinguished the good player, the good guitarist, as opposed to the good teacher, because those are, I fully agree, those are two completely different things. Happens all the time in lots of different fields. People that are excellent at what they do, but they cannot relay it in a tangible, good way that's a beneficial or positive experience for the people. So I appreciate that you do that, and that mindfulness, watching that mind towards yourself, it's a great thing to have in the mix from the get-go. I mean, that's huge. That's a big piece. Did you have any more thoughts on that? And if not, I have like more stuff I want to pick your brain, but was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, well, I could definitely relate to the whole like bad taste in your mouth. And, when we're learning something, whatever it is, we're really opening up sort of like a very vulnerable place. Mm-hmm. Because when we're in the learning mindset, no matter what we're doing, we're basically becoming a sponge. We're activating that kind of record mechanism. Mm-hmm. So how we're learning is as important, if not more, than what we're learning.
Yeah.
And if we're learning in a stressful environment, if we're learning to play guitar or whatever it is, feeling stressed inside, we're going to learn stress.
Yep.
So I also had a top period where I had to disengage from music, even, physical hurt, emotional hurt, and just burnout. Yep. And part of it was restructuring back with this approach, which ended up being a beautiful gift because now I could share it with other people. Yeah.
I sat with that for a long time. It's cool to hear that has happened to you, but it was one of those things where I sat with that for a long time. And I looked back because I had a lot of animosity and anger, and I felt like psychic and emotional trauma from that tutelage method.
It is.
And when I came out of it, I was like, I felt damaged. And when I talked to other people who ultimately left, they all said the same thing. They're like, my spirit and my mind and my body is tired from having been connected to that. And some of them never really came back fully to martial arts. They sort of have circulated around. Some have, some haven't. But it was demoralizing. It was tiring, and it's just strange that, that is, I don't want to say it's commonplace, but it's part of the journey. And I look at the time, I had a lot of animosity towards it. And now I kind of look back, and it's almost like when you're in a bad relationship when you're younger and you kind of find out what you don't want in a person. And I thought it was like, well, I did learn quite a bit though. Like even though it wasn't like a tasty pill to swallow, it really did help me formulate better and reorient to what I actually am looking for. The type of teacher, the type of methodology, and not leading with fear and, that stress, because that ultimately, I mean, it made it hard to learn. It makes it makes it very difficult. Like it's not enjoyable. So, well, Josh, can you talk about the pieces that you have mentioned before in the mindfulness? You're talking about, for one, the mental piece. Yeah. What's your mind doing from the teacher, sure, and then the external voice of them, and then also what you're telling yourself about your process. But can you talk about, because you have a background, we've talked about this, yoga and the body and the structure and some of the mindfulness stuff that you talk about, not just the mental piece, but can you talk about how that translates into the physical body, the breathing, like when you play the guitar, the strumming of the instrument, that stuff, the tactile, three-dimensional physical stuff I would like to hear about. Yeah,
for sure. I think it's good to also look at the word mindfulness and specifically how I like to define it, because it's a word we use. It's a little bit nebulous. Yep. What does it mean? We could deduce it to awareness or attention.
Yeah.
The tricky part about the word specifically is that I feel like many people, when they hear the word mind or think of the word mind, they're thinking of their thinking.
Yep.
So it's good to differentiate, and part of my background has been very influenced by Gurdjieff, who was this 20th century mystic that developed a school called the Fourth Way, which basically began exploring the human being as having three main centers of intelligence, which would be our thinking center, our feeling center, emotional center, and our moving kinesthetic body center. And that's been deeply informative about my approach to this. So when I use the word mindfulness, and I talk about this when I teach or give workshops, I like to flip it and look at it more like full mindness.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that full mind? Well, it's all of these awarenesses together.
Mm.
So it's not just aware of something, but it's that I can sense my body while I'm speaking.
Yes.
I'm present in my body while I'm here. I'm sensing the internal sensations that is a little bit more of a finer vibrational state, i.e. feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm aware of what the thinking is doing. So having the awarenesses on all those creates a state of mindfulness or the practice of mindfulness. So specifically the kinesthetic part, which, my background with yoga, the first time I'd ever been in a yoga studio, which was roughly 2004 or 5, was to play music for a class.
Mm.
And it was the beginning of my transition away from, let's say, traditional professional musicianship.
Yeah.
It's a more of the healing therapeutic modality that I'm on right now.
Mm-hmm.
That was a bridge going into that classroom.
I'll bet.
And specifically, it was the first time that I'd ever played music for an audience, although I cringe at that word, but for lack of a better word, where I felt their engagement completely. Because before that, it was bars, it was concert venues, it was places, but this was people present in their body in a movement practice, quiet room except for the teacher's voice and my music that felt like a film score for the moment.
Yeah.
So that began my personal interest in yoga and creating music for yoga practice, and then moving on to labeling some of my programs the yoga of guitar, and also have the yoga of ukulele, which are currently online courses and then some private study groups. But when we really look at yoga, like the root of the word is, you could define it a couple of ways, but uniting is one way. Mm-hmm. The harmony, to yoke.
Yeah.
And it's all of these awarenesses as a single awareness. So one of the big profound things in my parallel yoga music / yoga asana practice journey and music was like, wow, playing guitar is a movement practice.
Yeah.
And no one ever told me that, but well, I shouldn't say no one. Like I had a great teacher, Mike Mangini, who is a world-renowned drummer, is currently playing for Dream Theater, played for Steve Vai, Extreme.
Oh, wow.
Well, in contrast to the awful teacher, he was one of the greatest teachers I've had.
Yeah. And
he was the one but this was back in college, that tuned me into how important body awareness is in movement practice, in musical practice.
Yeah.
So and specifically how I found that begins to help. Well, one of the things is that assuming these 3 centers of awareness are thinking, where our thoughts are doing, our physical awareness and our emotional sensing awareness. If we're not aware of one of those 3 at a time, we're sort of functioning in not a fullness of our being.
Yeah.
So music practice as a kinesthetic awareness practice brings our awareness into our body. And just in contrast, like this is something that it's almost laughable, but when most people learn guitar or ukulele or piano or drums, are they ever really taught how to be present in their body before they start doing something with their body? And it's usually presented from a very visual and thought-based experience. Mm-hmm. Here's where you place your finger, place it there, move it that way. But if we're not present in our hand, it's going to be really challenging.
Yeah.
So these practices help us become present in our hand. And it does so because the sound is a externalized feedback of our awareness of our body. Mm-hmm. So the more present we are in our body, the more the sound will reflect that, basically. The other part of it, too, is that our body, specifically, as you mentioned, our breath and physical movements are directly connected to the neural patterns in our brain.
Yeah.
So we can learn how to train different brainwave states by moving our body in different ways. Mm-hmm. Like yoga, if we are moving really slowly into poses or, Tai Chi or Qigong, we're literally beginning to entrain our brain waves to follow longer cycles of time through our body. Mm-hmm. And when we learn how to kind of begin to function this internal, let's say gas pedal, that we could begin to slow that thing down,
Yeah.
we begin to have more awareness and more of a longer moment to have that awareness.
Right.
So using music as a physical practice that has an auditory representation is a direct connection into basically hacking into our internal tempo
Yeah.
and learning how to stabilize it and expand it.
Right. I like that.
Yeah. And I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
And I've developed practices that sync up the breath to all that. So literally pranayama, using sound and physical movement, which again, it begins to harmonize these three levels of awareness.
Right.
Because the thing with the thinking, and this is why like mantra is so important, is the thinking just thinks. So it's not so much that, oftentimes in people in meditation, people hear, I hear this from students, I have trouble stopping my mind, or I can't stop my mind. Well, first of all, the mind never stops.
Yeah.
Maybe in death,
Right.
So we need to reframe the languaging around that and the expectation. But maybe we slow down the thought patterns and create more gaps in between each thought.
Correct.
And in that gap, maybe we have something that feels quieter and more still and calibrated. So one of the tricks to mantra is it gives the thinking something to focus on. When you repeat a phrase on and on and on, and you keep learning how to entrain your attention to that, then all those other thoughts don't have a place to go because you're using the mechanism that's generally thinking about those thoughts to hone in on something.
Yeah. So I have a couple thoughts and then a question for you. So I think what's really cool about music, I played music for a number of years. I was actually a music major when I went to college and I stopped. After my dad died, I had a real weird radical turn where like music kind of shut off for whatever reason. It was just, and I pursued other things that I was kind of more naturally geared towards. But, I remember the coolest part about music was after I got through, because I played clarinet and saxophone and jazz band, and I played some instruments. I tinkered with guitar for a little while. But when I would play, I remember, like you said, it was kind of, mechanistic and put your fingers here and the note means that and blow. And there wasn't, it's very like rudimentary and clunky in the beginning. But I remember that point where after about a year of playing music where I started to kind of just naturally tune into how I could breathe, play a woodwind instrument, how I could change my hands and how I could get my body into it. That's why when you see musicians play and they're moving their body, I remember there was this cool thing where it became expressive and therapeutic as opposed to just learning a skill. And the cool part about, I think, music is that sound in general is very evocative. It brings a lot of emotion up quickly. And I think, all arts have their, I don't want to say pros and cons, but things that they accelerate or move faster. And I find that with something like Tai Chi, which has no sound, it takes people a little bit longer to get into what you would call the emotionally feel-good pieces of it, because there is no sound kind of coaxes that out of you faster, I think, in a way. There's a quicker biofeedback that seems to happen with it. But you're exactly right, is that once you get past the mechanistic, rigor of what is supposed to happen and how you actually make the sounds, then you get this therapy that sort of comes from it. And it's really cool in that way. And my question to you is about what you said, the three centers. Chinese medicine has the same, very similar thing. Lower Dantian, middle, and upper, and it's kind of like a pyramid. You got to have the physicality to build a strong, clean mind. And people, when they hear the word mindfulness, like you said, it's kind of a buzzword. It gets lumped up into new age fluff sometimes, like, oh, mindfulness. And that body piece that you're talking about, that's what seems like what anchors it down to where it pulls it out of just theory and just, like just this mental process that has no material thing. And it brings it down and anchors it down to something that's happening in your physicality. So my question is, when you are working with people and when they're coming to you for music and they want to learn this, what's I don't want to say pushback, not pushback, but how receptive are people to the idea that the physical body is the vehicle for which this happens? is that a big leap for people, or do they immediately be like, oh yeah, that makes sense? Or is it sort of, are Americans so stuck in their heads that it's a hard thing to kind of get them to grasp?
The reaction is generally very positive and relieving for people.
That's cool. Good.
Because it basically helps them understand a blind spot maybe.
Yeah.
And my clientele, gender-wise, I would say private, it's about half and half. Mm-hmm. My online programs, for whatever reason, seem to be much more women.
Interesting.
And I think partially because the programs call to that, or maybe I'm just marketing it in a certain way, I'm not sure. Yeah. But, so the response tends to be very revelatory for people of that. And also because it's experiential, because, I love that you brought up how bringing in the body, it's not just a theory at that point, it's an experiential moment.
Right.
So when somebody begins to feel their thumb in their right hand, and the right hand in general, all of a sudden it's buzzing and they're present, and there's internal meditations through it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh wow, like that's new. That's an experience that is tangible. And that's something that anybody could have from the get-go. And then to, even from a very beginner, playing a single string without that awareness and with that awareness is a world of difference.
Huge.
Yeah.
It's like you said, revelatory. People have this, it is a true aha epiphany moment. And just to add this is, side little story. In my undergrad, when I was in college, I took a psychology class. And this one day in class, it was like in the dead of winter in Chico, California, and I was cold. And I had been sitting in class, and the heater was broken in class, and I'd been cold the whole class. And the teacher got to this section on mind-body connection, like this psychology class about this. And he had us do this thing where he said, he made us say this mantra: sparkling eyes, smiling face, alert, amused body. And I remember thinking, he's like, repeat that, sparkling eyes, smiling face, alert, amused body and mind, I think. And he would have us say that. And then he said, now I want you to imagine holes in the bottom of your feet, and your nostrils are in the bottom of your feet. And when you breathe, I want you to breathe all the way up to the crown of your head. And so he had this thing where it was this, this idea about how you get your mind into your body. And I remember within less than a minute, my hands got hot. The circulation came back. And I thought, that is the weirdest thing, where we've taken kind of a mental theory and put it into the body. And my body has had now a physiological response. And I remember thinking the whole rest of the day, like, I was paying attention to my body way more because he got my awareness into it, And it's a simple thing, and it was a simple experience. But when you're talking about this, it kind of takes me back to that. It's like this basic thing of like, we're learning a skill set. We've got this thing that we're asking our body to do, and you've got to remember that the body is making, it's the foundational, three-dimensional thing that's making this come into form. It seems so basic, but I think it is a thing we kind of disconnect from. We forget that the body's really critically important for pretty much everything we do. So it follows suit that you're going to have to pay attention to what you're doing with it while you're learning this kind of stuff.
Speaking of, this garbage truck coming by.
Mr. Garbage Truck.
But we'll work through that. Like contrary sounds can be positive
for
too.
Sure.
But like it's so true. I learned initially very, very heady, because that's kind of just my own proclivity. Like I tend to be on the more philosophical, thinky realm of things. And but part of the unlocking of music was beginning to bring in those other centers. It's pretty profound. A big influence and part of my own path began in 2013, where I attended my first course with Robert Fripp. So Robert Fripp, short story, is the guitarist and founder of a group called King Crimson, which was it began in the late 60s. Okay. He really doesn't enjoy this word, but the founders of progressive rock, King Crimson, and they're still together today. The band has morphed, but anyway, short story of Robert is he attended some fourth way programs in the lineage of Gurdjieff, specifically John G. Bennett at Sherborne House. And Robert basically, through his own experience of that fourth way work, created a program called Guitar Craft in the mid 80s. And specifically, Guitar Craft is said to developing a relationship with yourself, the guitar, and music. These three sort of centers. And you're basically having a discipline of the hands, the head, and the heart. Which would be the hands being the moving, the heart, the feeling, emotional center, and the head being the thinking center.
Yep.
And Robert developed this whole program that eventually turned into a different thing called Guitar Circle, which when I did my first course with him and the group, that was in 2013. And that was going really deep into these practices of, I mean, you could call it mindfulness. It's something very unique, and it's hard to pin down into labels.
Yeah.
But my work with Robert, it was very, very informative and continues to be. And we begin the day in that group with a practice of doing nothing, which is a sitting practice that's not passive. It's actually a lot of internal attention work. Mm-hmm. But the idea is, before we can do something with the body, can we ask it to do nothing? And nothing, an intentional nothing, not a passive nothing.
Right.
So, so I just wanted to mention that was also along the journey a huge and continues to be a very deeply informative experience.
Yeah, and I like it. I like it a lot. And as you're talking about this, I think that the biggest piece, again, which is just kind of circling back to what you're saying and you're reiterating and just, solidifying this idea even more, is that the moment the body becomes involved, what is just mental theory becomes palpable. I think that's the biggest the biggest thing. And I think that's pretty relevant and pertinent for Americans, because we're so in our heads and we're such a thinking culture, and we're so scientifically Western, and everything is, measured, and we're just a sharp metallic by Chinese medicine standards, so in that space that we forget to get down into the heavy earth, into the body and into the, and it does ground things out. I mean, I think that's why we see it in a lot of different ways. People that are stressed out and angry, when they go exercise, immediately what happens, like usually that's the cortisol levels drop, because we're moving the physicality of our body. We're allocating resources somewhere else, and we're not just doing that. So I think that's the coolest part about this, is that you're bringing that in from the get-go. I think, when you told me about this originally, it was amazing, because arts relate. And I remember you telling me all about a couple of years ago when we were doing the financial feng shui thing, and you were just talking to me about your process and how you've navigated it. And it made me think about external martial arts and internal martial arts. External martial arts, they'll train the hard external stuff for years. And at the high level, when you get up into the black belt, they'll start talking about how you focus your breath deeper into the body. And a lot of the internal arts, they start there. They're giving that sensitivity right out of the gates. Maybe you don't pick up the fighting self-defense stuff as much, but you're picking up this sensitivity right from the start as you develop this thing. And I was like, that's kind of what you're doing. You're not just taking the external movements and teaching it from this military place. Yeah. You're immediately starting the conversation with, hey, feel your body, feel what your breath is doing, what's your spine doing, sense your fingers. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, because when you open the door from that place, it slows people down. They get to have a more relaxing experience, to where the practice isn't bringing stress to their life either. Because how many of us, like you said, they start something new and it's just like, oh, I suck at this. And it's like, God, how much more do we need of that? How much, we have plenty of that for the most part.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. Well, so let me ask you this, Josh, and you mentioned this right before the interview started, and I want to shift gears if we can. One of the things that struck me when I first met you in person was you had said that part of your music journey was that you had sat in medicine ceremonies, psychedelic medicine ceremonies, and had played music and facilitated music in that context many times. And that immediately was like, whoa, I would love to hear about that, because, I've had one formal medicine ceremony that was 2 ceremonies over the course of a weekend, one weekend. And that radically changed things in me forever. And it's not to say that I won't go back to it and try it again or sit with it again. But I thought, geez, if you've played music where you're facilitating that for a group of people many, many times, that was fascinating. And I would love for you to, we don't have to go into it forever, but I would love to just hear about that process, how you fell into that, and what's been your experience in facilitating music in a psychedelic space. That's big.
For sure. Yeah, and maybe I can bridge it by making one more comment to this last chapter, which is, in addition to body awareness, the other thing that is missing, and this is probably the heightened most important thing, is auditory awareness. So every note and combination of notes has its own color and effect on our nervous system and our body. And that's what the musician learns. So just like when you mix blue and red, you get purple. And the painter knows that. And they knows if you do a little bit more of this blue and a little bit less of this red, it'll change the shade.
Right.
Well, the auditory experience of music, which is really where music is experienced. So the body becomes the vehicle for that. But the auditory awareness is the primary.
Yeah.
And the kinesthetic is basically right underneath, kind of in a transparency level.
Yeah.
And the different tones and combinations of tones, as well as rhythms and tempos, all have a different effect on us. So in this method, in my approach to music and my own revelations and studies, because when I first got turned on to Gurdjieff, one of the things in his book was he was saying he would play melodies and everybody would cry, the objective nature of music. And that really excited me.
Yeah.
Because it was like, I do have that scientific brain. It's like, if I could play those combinations of notes, somebody will cry.
Cool.
And not in a manipulative way, but just sort of like, that's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like playing with the power. Yeah. It's like, wow, I can do something. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when pointed towards a healing modality. So basically a deep study of that and combinations through yoga classes, that was kind of simultaneous. I'm like, okay, well, how can I create objective experience? Obviously, everybody's going to have a different subjective experience.
Yeah.
But there is an objective aspect to music, and this is where we'll bridge. And I have the guitar, and just to give a demonstration of this.
Yeah, please.
These two notes together, and it doesn't even matter what the names of those notes are, but those two notes have a relationship. Every two notes together has a relationship, and every one of those relationships has a different feeling that it brings inside. Now, how we call that feeling might be different, but there's an objective reality to it. And the reason it is because, when we think about notes, we don't necessarily think of every note as a rhythm, but it is. So this note, for example, is vibrating at, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure 110 vibrations per second. So literally that string is doing this 110 times.
Right.
And if we looked at that as a visual, you would see these wave patterns.
Right.
This note here is vibrating, and here's where my math is going to go off. But I'd rather not do that math. But I get what you're saying. It's like they have different speeds. Basically. And it's faster.
Yeah, right.
And actually, in the proportion of these two waves together, if you looked at it drawn out or in cymatics or any sort of visual representation, is a balanced proportional wave pattern together.
Right.
And that's why these two notes create that balanced, stable feeling inside. And a lot of soundtracks begin on that, or like the sort of the king enters the room.
Yeah.
So those sounds have an impact of creating stability because of the rhythmic wave patterns in proportion. And just in contrast, these notes are very dissonant and not stable.
Yes.
And that creates a different internal feeling as well, generally kind of more tense.
Right.
So the musical patterns and tones have an effect on our nervous system, which is connected to our body through our auditory system.
Right.
So that's sort of the full pathway.
Yeah. That's very cool. Yeah.
So, basically when I'm working with people, and then we'll transition into ceremonies or creating music for a therapeutic environment.
Yeah.
It's using the knowledge of how those tones make us feel and tempos make us feel. So just like a very fast-paced song gets our nervous system excited. Like if you're watching a car chase in a movie, the chances are the music is going to be fast and inducing that sort of tension inside.
Right.
Versus a dramatic scene or something that's slower and longer will have music to accompany that. If you've ever watched a movie without a soundtrack, it feels very eerie.
That's weird.
Because you realize that the music is what is creating the emotional response that matches up to the scene, and it kind of tricks our emotional system into feeling something.
Yeah.
So when I'm working with this method, it's using note combinations that inherently and objectively create a more calming, peaceful state, because it's having that effect on the nervous system into the body through the awareness.
Right.
So
therapeutic sound. Yeah, quite
literally.
Yeah, literally therapeutic sound.
It's nutritious sound. And that's, you know, like different sounds have different sort of impact on us.
Yep.
So how that moved then into medicine ceremonies, which primarily was ayahuasca ceremonies, some mushroom, but primarily ayahuasca. That exploration of learning how the notes and everything works with us through my own creating music for yoga, you know, albums or live experiences.
Yeah.
And so that opened up a sort of a knowledge that I began to understand, and the ability to be present in my body as well. My first psychedelic experience ever was taking acid at 14, and I took it in school. I took it about 9 a.m. Hit it, and I don't know what I was doing. I was just curious and looking, you know, for new experiences.
Sure.
And at the time, you know, I was interested in psychedelia and altering consciousness. Anyway, I went through the school day tripping my ass off.
Yeah, that's intense. It's very intense.
At 14, and I went to every class, and it was really challenging, but I knew I needed to keep my shit together.
Yeah.
And I did I did a good enough job that no one knew I was tripping, but or maybe some people knew, but but it felt like a shamanistic sort of what's the word?
Journey?
Well, that's for sure. Initiation.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I learned how to access something inside that was like, okay, I know that dude's face looks purple,
right?
And the floor is dancing right now, you know.
Right.
But I need to keep my center together. So it kind of helped me learn my center. Short story is I stopped doing psychedelics at 15. My last trip at that point was Jerry Garcia's last show, Grateful Dead.
Oh, wow.
Deeply revealing for me. It was the first time I felt the sunshine move through music, and love, and a whole Soldier Field in Chicago, a whole arena, football arena of people who had positive vibes, positive intentions.
Right.
Very much in contrast to the metal shows and things I was going to at the time.
Sure.
And I also saw people who were burned out. And in that lucid psychedelic state of acid where everything is very clear, I saw people who were never coming back. And I knew at that time, that can't happen. I can't let that happen.
And just to clarify, if I'm hearing you right, so when you say burned out, you mean from the actual use of LSD?
I don't know from what.
Okay, but they looked burned out. They looked like
they were.
Yeah,
they were, and they weren't just on a trip. They were.
Right. Got it.
They were. They've gone somewhere that they can't come back. That they weren't coming back from. You know.
Right.
And I saw it. So I knew I needed to not. And then when I was about 25, 26, I was reintroduced to psychedelics in a more spiritual, intentional setting. And I had already been meditating. I began my meditation practice when I was 20. So I had some years of internal work, also lots of musical work. And at that time, I began also exploring music and psychedelics and that combination. So I began practicing at times. You know, I would take some acid mostly and play guitar and just sort of, and it made it difficult. It opened up the sound in a certain way, but my coordination sure was different.
Yeah.
So it basically it helped me learn a deeper level of awareness, because it was almost like, wow, this is hard. I need to become more attentional and present in my body. So that sort of began some experimentation of playing music from that place. And then I took a long break from all of it. Like I had a good period of sort of new indoctrination, and then no substances at all. I was going through a pretty deep depression, and through a lot of synchronicities, I was invited to join an ayahuasca ceremony. I had drank the medicine and gone to 2 ceremonies 8 years before that. So I had 2 experiences with ayahuasca, both within about a year, but both 8 years previously. And the person who invited me, the person who was leading the ceremony, said, bring your guitar and we would love to have you play. And my reaction was like, well, God, I don't know if I'll be able to, but I'm happy to bring it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it was a very deep ceremony, and I was able to play. And not only that, but I found the medicine space to create a different auditory awareness within myself that I basically was able to hear the sounds better. And whatever that medicine does, it sure has a very beautiful relationship with sound and music.
Yeah.
And basically after that ceremony, I was asked to be a musician for further ceremonies, continuing to drink the medicine while playing, which for some people, it was like, how do you do that? And the internal process, well, I don't think I'd be able to if I hadn't had, close to 3 decades at that time of practice.
Sure.
So, like obviously I had a certain degree of mastery already. So even if I was in an induced state, I had enough already established.
Yeah, the foundation was laid already.
Foundation, yeah, exactly. And all of the work playing for yoga classes and studying music basically allowed me to move into the medicine space and create therapeutic sounds. And basically, we didn't get into this, and maybe we will, but a big part of music and my approach to music in mindfulness is learning how to develop deeper levels of attention, and that's by using time, which is rhythm, which is measured. Rhythm is measured time. And just like if you're building a house or a room, it's important to have accurate measurements of the space, because if let's say a room is 10 feet long, directly in the center that's the first balance point between those 2 extremes. So rhythm and time work the same way. And it can be difficult for many people to keep good rhythm or time. And the reason is because our timekeeper, which is our brain and body, fluctuates in its own time cycles. So we perceive time differently because our brain basically is moving through time differently. When we regulate that part, something changes. And that's like the real core of my own personal work with music, both as a teacher and just in my own practice, is learning how to use time as a means of regulating attention and basically having a crystalline experience. So in medicine ceremonies, that became a big part of what I was doing with people because, people are coming into a very vulnerable state. So at that point, music is guiding them through it. And it can be very challenging for people to open up, especially ayahuasca, which is very strong for many people. That the music gives their attention, even if it's in the background, something to hold on to while they're maybe dissolving.
It's like a guide. I mean, that's the way I've heard it
100% the
described.
guide.
It's like if you're feeling lost, follow the music.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
So, for me, taking that role deeply as a sacred guide was to make sure I'm holding the space, which means holding my space. Because if I'm drifting off, then the music's going to drift off, and then so it necessitated a deeper level of awareness internally, which I find is a beautiful practice. And then using these combinations of sounds or rhythms as a means to guide through the room, while also intuitively sensing, well, what's the energy of the room? Do we need to be a little bit more up? Do we need to bring it down and help soothe? Do we need to kind of get a little jagged for a moment to push through some energy, and then as that's pushed through, bring it back together as a harmony? But the foundation of that work and my work in general is all about harmony, basically.
Makes a lot of sense. I have a logistical question for the people that are have not partaken in an ayahuasca ceremony or are not familiar with the rhythms that sort of crop up during a ceremony. Oftentimes, many people will vomit, and they will what they call purge. And so, as the musician facilitator, I mean, if you're ingesting the medicine, how do you navigate that very logistical thing of I'm playing music, but hold on while I yak? Like, how does that how does that work? Or has it worked? Or what do you do? I mean,
I've never purged while playing. I've had a couple moments where I really thought it was going to happen.
Yeah.
And, for those who have not been in a ceremony, you have a bucket next to you,
Yep.
And it's a very raw experience, and it's vulnerable, and,
to say the least.
yeah. But I never happened, but there's moments where it felt like it was close. Personally, I've actually only purged, vomited one time in all the ceremonies I've done. Mm-hmm. I don't know why that is. I think part of it, especially when you're going in as a guide, as a guardian, you begin to learn the diet that works for you.
Yeah. And
what you can and can't eat ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And also how to kind of move the energy a little bit. So,
interesting. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I have a question for you, and this is something I heard from when I partook in the ceremony back in 2018. The two shamans that were facilitating and doing this for us. I didn't. Everyone in the room. I think there were 15 people in this particular ceremony. Everybody in the room threw up violently except me. So I didn't purge at all. Never even got. Well, I didn't. It's not that I didn't get nauseous. I had moments of nausea when I would think a certain way, but that's kind of what was.
Yeah.
I was being schooled on internally. Was like, if you think like that, it's going to make you sick. And so I would have moments where I would think about something or be judgmental, and I would start to feel sick. And then if I peeled away from it, I wouldn't get sick. So there was that. But I asked the man the next morning, I said, so why was everyone puking? And I wasn't. And he said, well, if you noticed, he says, you cried a lot. You like that was a big piece of, I cried. I mean, out of the 8-hour journey, I would say a good 5 of them were me crying in some capacity, sometimes really hard, sometimes just softly weeping. But I was crying quite a bit. And he said, you might be on that spectrum where the way you purge is actually just more emotional than physical.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if that has been true for you. Because do you cry more during a ceremony, or do you at all? Or is it just you don't puke and you don't cry?
I've cried. I think one of the things is that, you probably can relate to in your own leading moments of leading a class or a session.
Yeah.
Being there as a facilitator, I would still have my own process, definitely.
Yeah.
and definitely had many times of nausea, and I can relate to the thoughts that would create that for sure.
Yeah.
But it was always there in service of holding space for the group. So
right.
I think and part of the music also helps keep that clear. Mm-hmm. Because it's less about my expression. If I'm expressing in a ceremony, I feel like I might not be sensitive to the needs of the group. Mm-hmm. So I try to play more from that objective, clear channel place, rather than this is how I feel and I want you to feel it too. Especially if it's a more emotional thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful, man. Well, Josh, in kind of like a summary, I always ask people, my guests, when we've kind of gone through and we've touched on a lot of different things, but, to recap everything and to put it into a nutshell with kind of a leading question here. But, if people are listening to this and they've never played guitar, they've never really, embarked upon anything musical, but have interest, why does music matter? Why, and moreover, why does mindfulness in the context of music matter? If you were to put that in a nutshell for people that are like, why should I do this? What do you say?
Just a simple existential question on the most powerful thing in humanity, and let's just pop it into a nutshell.
Yeah.
Well, I can give a lot of reasons why I personally feel music matters. Mm-hmm. I feel probably the biggest one I can present is that it seems to matter for everybody. So, for different reasons. Mm-hmm. But it seems, without even getting deeply into the philosophical, which I will get into because I can't help myself, but for one reason or another, music has touched almost everybody's life to some degree, to various degrees as well. Here's a quick, just like edgy place. There's a wonderful LEG clip where he's interviewing Donald Trump. This is pre-POTUS Trump.
Yeah.
This is a sentence. And LEG asks him, what's the most popular thing in the world? And Trump goes, music. And LEG's like, no, that's pretty good, Anyway, but I mean, however you think about that guy, like that's probably the right answer.
Yeah.
Like out of all cultures,
it's universal.
History of time,
yeah,
genders, binaries, non-binaries, out of all the things,
yeah.
Music is really a continuity of humanity.
Yeah.
So if we look at it just from a sociological place, music helps the individual, and it helps group collective. It brings people together. It brings them together. And now here's a deeper level. To having synchronous moments. If you are watching a band play, there is a beat. If there's a beat that we're all in training to. So now all of our brain waves, to some degree, various and body movements are coming into a shared pattern.
Right.
Which something magical happens, that when that happens. And synchrony exists all throughout nature. Just a little quick side note. Why do crickets cricket? For example, and they cricket together. Yeah. They chirp, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And from an evolutionary standpoint, it's theorized, and I would agree, that it makes them sound bigger to predatory animals that are bigger.
Yeah.
So when a group of crickets are cricketing together, something else might be like, holy shit, I don't want to fuck over there.
Right.
Because there's some big ass thing, but really it's just a bunch of small things in harmony together.
Linking
so there's some level of evolutionary perseverance of coming into synchrony together, Yeah. So at one level, music touches us. At another level, it brings people together. At a deeper level, especially from a musical practice or like direct experience with music, it brings ourself together.
Yeah.
So the sort of gradations of finer and finer levels of harmonization. So it begins to create homeostasis within the system, nervous system, brain waves, heart,
right,
which is very valuable. It also gives us something very productive to do with our time. So, we all have 24 hours a day. That's the same. And we all have X amount of days that's not the same.
Yeah.
And our awareness and attention and how we use time through the day is not the same. So if we watch 3 hours of Netflix and no judgment, and maybe that's an enriching experience, but I would say for most people, it's not. It's a passing of the moment.
Right.
And what I would say is, we're paying our attention to that thing, and we're spending our time. We're spending our attention. A music practice, like other practices, we're investing our time. We're investing our attention. So an hour, let's say, of musical practice stays longer than just that hour. Just like if you put $1,000 in a bank and it turns into $1,100, you get a net gain. Yeah. If you put 1,000 hours into music practice or any practice, but we're talking about music.
Yeah.
You don't just lose that time, but you're actually storing it into something that can bring you joy. It could make a campfire more exciting, simply playing music.
Yep.
It can lead into changing humanity. Yeah. We look at, so music matters.
To say the least.
Yeah. And, I really look at it as a consciousness, and basically, and this is a little esoteric, but a map of understanding flow and understanding harmony and the ability to tune to that. And where that leads, it could be a saving grace. It's like, because, well, as consciousness continues to evolve, it seems that music continues to evolve as well. And I look at it the other way, that sort of music is bringing consciousness to greater levels.
Yeah.
And if we look at primal music, it was less accurate. And modern music is very accurate. Now, not to get all into the technical side of that.
Yeah.
But if you're building a house and you can measure the room, you're going to have a more stable house.
Correct.
So as our awarenesses and also the merging of technology has helped move that forward, it really has allowed for, I think, music to have an even deeper impact at the consciousness level, which may be, like, not that I have visions of utopia, I personally don't, nor do I have visions of dystopia. I just kind of think humanity will always be a work in progress.
Yeah.
But there seems to be something about music at its core that continues to help upgrade our consciousness and also bring us more and more into levels of alignment, both internally and as a group collective.
Well said. I'm not going to add anything to that. That's very well said, Ben. Well, Josh, thank you for this interview. I really appreciate what you're doing. I love your take on it. I love that you're bringing mindfulness and bridging it into the body, into music. People need it. The world is ripe and ready for this on a mass scale. So I'm all in support of it. If people want to find you, if they want to follow your work, if they want to check out your programs, social media, what's the best way to see what you're doing and to get a hold of you should they want to pursue something with you?
Yeah, for sure. And just to take a minute to talk about these programs, I have 2 online courses. One is called the Yoga of Guitar, and one is called the Yoga of Ukulele. And it's these methods applied, obviously, one to the guitar and one to ukulele.
Yep.
And those are online courses that anybody could join at any time and do on their own time.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have, I've just began to launch these things, but something called Ukulele Mindfulness and Guitar Mindfulness, which are 5-week group Zoom sessions. Mm-hmm. So they're basically a chance for us to meet in real time, especially right now when we're all kind of like separated physically, to have a shared moment of presence and work on music to develop mindfulness. So at this moment, we're getting ready for one in June for guitar. So we're wrapping up the ukulele one. We have a guitar mindfulness coming in June, and then ukulele in July. And it looks like we're just going to alternate those.
Great.
So basically, there's going to be rolling things, and then I also work with people one-on-one as my space is available. So those are kind of 3 tiers of diving in. And I have a number of different websites. So I don't know what the best,
You can list them all, or you can list the ones that you think are most, relevant right now.
Okay. So there's my site, which is sadly in need of an update, and I'm sadly in need of an assistant. So maybe there's one watching right now. But joshbrill.com is a site, and maybe by this comes up, I'll have links to the other ones.
Okay.
But there's also yogaofguitar.com.
Okay.
And yogaofukulele.com.
Beautiful.
And then on Facebook, I have a page, Josh Brill Music and Mindfulness. And excellent. Instagram is Yoga of Guitar. So maybe there's a place we could put the link somewhere. I don't know.
Oh yeah, when we post, I'll put everything up. But it's just good as people listening. It kind of orients them, because people oftentimes will look up right away when they're listening. So this gives them that opportunity. But yeah, I'll put everything when we release it. We'll put all of your data up.
Cool.
Well, Josh, thank you again. Much appreciated. Keep playing music, man. Keep doing your thing. I love it.
Yeah, man. Thanks. It was really fun. I feel like we could go on for 5 more hours.
We could, and that's why I've always said to my guests, the people that I have on, it's always like there's a re-invitation or an invitation to come back, because usually we don't cover everything. But this was a good place to start. So I think it was good. So
great, man.
Thank you again. Thank you. All right. Take care.
Appreciate it.
Take care, Josh.
Bye-bye.